Welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patti, and I'm here with my sister Nancy. We grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. We're also nerdy about history and culture, but critical of religion. So get ready to get mad or to nod your head in agreement. Today, we're presenting part 4 of our history of the life and influences of Herbert W. Armstrong. Today's focus will be all about the 1980s, which is when we were growing up. I love it so much, Nancy.
Drinking this Korean spirit I got from Costco. It's pretty good.
Nice.
I wanted to start us off with a little something lighthearted and fun to kick off the 1980s. I don't think you've seen this video before, but this is from the Festival 80 of the Young Ambassadors. You know, Armstrong had the Ambassador College in Pasadena. I just have to show it to you, okay? I don't think you've seen it before, so let's watch it together, okay?
Oh my God. Okay, let's do it.
From the award-winning campus of Ambassador College in Pasadena, welcome to Festival 80 with the Young Ambassadors. Your host, Dave Myers, with Big Beak, the Wonder Chicken, and Ross Jutsam and the Ambassador Band. And now, to take you on a musical tour of God's beautiful campus are the Young Ambassadors who extend to you their own personal Welcome to Ambassador.
Come from all over this country, Anchorage to Bangor, Maine, even from faraway places, on mountaintop or down upon the plain, seeking the message of goodwill, working very hard every day.
Stop for a while and we'll bring you a smile as you listen to what we say. Welcome to Ambassador. You'll have a great time here, we're sure. We're so glad you came our way and helped to brighten up our day. Seeing new friends and new faces, forgetting all your worries and woes. Singing with tenors and basses, rehearsing brand new songs for TV shows.
Studying hard for the finals, trying to help each other along.
To be part of the family, that's the reason why we're singing this song. Welcome to Ambassador.
We'll have a great time here, we're sure.
We're so glad you came our way and helped to brighten up our day. On campus, every day is filled to the brim. Cheering our team at the ball game. Oh, lots of ways to serve and give. Fly so high. Try to reach the sky, 'cause we're learning about a great way to live. Welcome to Ambassador. You'll have a great time here, we're sure. We're so glad you came our way and helped to brighten up our day.
Trying to recapture true values, looking up
Oh my
who's
God.
not war, seeking a brighter tomorrow. Excitement's always knocking at your door. So glad to make your acquaintance. Join us and don't delay.
One last thing that we'd like to sing, may God be with you every day. Welcome to Ambassador. You'll have a great time here, we're sure. We're so glad you came our way.
was hot stuff back then, I'm guessing. It's so utterly cheesy. I can't. Was 1980 just cheesy
I
though?
had to show that to
think
you, Pat.
maybe.
1980s, I mean, that's how it started out. But then when you add on top of it churchy cringiness like that, this is the result that we get.
My favorite part was all of the couples popping up from between the bushes. I'm like,
do you remember watching any of that as a kid? Because I do not.
the ones we saw from later, I do. But that one was special for sure.
That was the first one. That was from 1980. So that one kicked off the rest of them, which would go on, I think, annually for at least 6 years.
On a wonderful morning like this, when the sun is as big as a yellow balloon,
Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again.
That was the church we grew up in, Pets. Isn't that fun?
Well, and isn't it funny? Because do you remember we did cheerleading as a part of church, and they had cheerleaders figuring very prominently in that video. So clearly there was a bent toward, all right, we're going to show the proper places for women to be acting in the church. We'll show you. It was very strict. The boys played basketball and the girls were cheerleaders.
I do remember playing basketball, though.
Oh, that's true. In later years, once we were in Wisconsin.
In later years, not this early. Yeah.
Yeah. In California, I don't remember any crossover. It was boys do the basketball, girls do the cheerleading.
When this video was released to the young ambassadors, you were 1 year old, Pats.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Do we have any announcements? I know that we started off very lighthearted. Reason being, we have a lot of heavy topics today, just as we did in the 70s. But I did want to give a shout out to our very good friend, Tim Mills, who is struggling at the moment. He released a very heart-wrenching video recently. He's going through a lot of crap with his, I think, soon-to-be ex-wife and abuse involved with his children, and he is trying to protect them. Please go check out his channel. That is Tim Mills at Harmonic Atheist. And please just show him some support in any way that you can. All right. Yeah, we need each other when things go wrong, and he's feeling quite hopeless right now.
I think the laws, depending on the state you're in, can make this just a terrible situation to be an atheist with an ex who's still a Christian. Oh my gosh.
Right. And he's
what he's
Georgia.
dealing with. Oh, okay.
Wonderful person, heart of gold. He wants the best for his kids, obviously. He wants to get them out of harm's way. And I told him, if you ever need a couple people to talk to, you and I were abused as children by basically beaten into submission and obedience.
Yep.
And we can relate. And the lasting aftermath of that is not a good thing at all. So he's trying to avoid the ramifications of that.
Well, thankfully his kids have him on their side right now.
Right. And I told him that too. At least they have one parent that is rooting for them, where we had both parents that were abusing us. And so we didn't have anyone to turn to. So I just offered him our help in any way we can. So go show him some love, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Tim Mills. Okay. All right. Shall we get into this timeline, Patti? All right, so by 1980, just to give a little stat here, the Worldwide Church of God was worth around $80 million, which today that would be around $320 million of tax-free donated tithe money.
Tax-free. I mean, to me, that's really the problem. And the fact that he felt really free to spend it on luxurious things while all of his attendees and members were scraping by. Because, I mean, the pinch was already on for sure by the 80s, like that extra fluff that would have gone to retirement and all of that stuff by then, or back in the, 50s and 60s, that he was skimming off the top of everybody. Like, that's gone. Capitalism, sorry, I know I always go to that, but like the way our money system worked and the way our wages were not increasing and the cost of everything was, that was gone already. Families were already struggling to even have that on the top. Like, 30%, like, whew. The other thing I was thinking about is we learned last time from the 70s that there was likely some shady shit going on. So to say that it was 80 million might be understating it because Stanley Rader had his ways of putting money in other places.
Yeah, I just actually discovered this morning that there was some chapel that was built in Orange County, California, and it never got used, apparently. This massive chapel. I couldn't even find much information about it, but it's
A chapel owned by the Worldwide Church of
yes.
God?
They were not known for having their own like churches built. They usually rented places. But
Mm-hmm.
again, Stanley Rader had a very good way of making money kind of go under the table, so to speak. Yeah.
Yep.
Worked in
Yep.
Beverly Hills, drove what, Lamborghini. And I think he
Really?
himself had his own private jet too. I know Ted did. And then Armstrong had two of them.
Wow.
Also in the year 1980, we are going to be talking about a particular book quite a bit here by one David Robinson, who used to be an evangelist for the Worldwide Church of God. Obviously, no longer is. He was excommunicated like so many. This is the book that was extremely controversial and one that the church tried to ensure that it did not get published because there was information in here they did not want to reach out to the public. So
Did they sue him?
I don't know if they sued him, actually. That's a good question.
Because how else do you do that, right? You either pay them off to not do it or you sue them.
Well, I don't think they sued him. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I actually don't know how they tried to stop him. I just know that they, regardless of whether the information was correct in this or not, whether it was truthful, they didn't want Armstrong's reputation tarnished. The title of the book is Herbert Armstrong's Tangled Web by David Robinson.
I loved the quote at the beginning of the book, actually. So it was Sir Walter Scott. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
So he knows he was deceived.
Well, and he's flat out accusing Herbert Armstrong of running a scam here.
He absolutely did. And a lot of these men caught on to it as well. A lot of them wrote books. This just happened to be one of the first ones and one of the most significant because of how detailed it was. I'm not sitting here saying that everything in it is true or accurate, but he definitely seems pretty adamant about some of the conversations that he's had with Armstrong himself, with Stanley Rader, with all the players of the Worldwide Church of God, or he would give information on things that other people told him. So make of that what you will. I'm just going to go through a few of the takeaways from this book. I found it very interesting, easy read, and it worked like more of a, not so much a timeline. He went a little bit back and forth, which was kind of hard to follow. There's also so many names in this book. I had to like keep a checklist so I could remember who everyone was. So he kind of talked from the perspective of like, so-and-so told me this, and like, who the fuck is that? Now I have to look up that person, and then who's that person? So there was a lot of research I had to do on this book.
Wouldn't you say that that indicates he was really writing that book for, like, he wasn't writing it as an expose to the general public. He was writing it specifically for people who were in the cult still.
Right. People who knew these other people specifically.
Yeah.
It really did feel like that. Absolutely. One of the themes of this book that he covers a lot was how thin-skinned Armstrong himself was, that he blamed everything on everyone else. Nothing was ever his fault. He had an extremely violent temper, and nothing set off that temper more than some imagined slight, as if
holy shit, that is like narcissist.
Herbert W. Armstrong, internationally recognized ambassador for world peace, visiting prominent leaders around the globe, discussing the cause of world problems, and proclaiming the good news of the world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Herbert W. Armstrong.
Yeah, it sounds like someone who can't at all see themselves because they hold themselves in such high esteem and like they're so completely fragile.
Well, people that are extremely thin-skinned and don't like to be questioned also don't have a lot of self-confidence. They don't necessarily believe the things that they're saying. And so when they're questioned, they take it very personally. They start attacking you.
So that's a defense mechanism. Like, and because our country was like all about the rich white man privilege, it worked and he was able to keep it going. So gross.
Right.
So, and people let him get away with it. That's the gross part.
There was this little quote that Armstrong wrote in his autobiography, which does come out in the 80s, by the way, where he mentions that the great men he emulated, like Benjamin Franklin or Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt, he said they would roll over in their graves if they knew that women were in the workforce. His successor that he chose took over the organization, and he changed the doctrine because he believed it to be bullshit, as so many of the people in the church did.
Yep.
And I'm going to say that Armstrong would roll over in his grave if he knew the legacy that he built crumbled before everyone's eyes not long after he died.
I mean, yes, I'll agree with you, but also I would say there's far too many people stuck in Armstrongist cults and or the small house churches that are still adhering doggedly to those doctrines. So, I mean, yeah, he failed. It's just a slow failure. It's taking us a lot longer to fully eradicate it than maybe you and I would like. But that's the goal. Ideologies that hurt us can go away now, and that's what we're about. So we might as well unpack our shit right here publicly and let other people see it and understand too, and give them like permission, right? That's our whole thing, is giving people permission to question it, get rid of it, recontextualize their life.
If you go ahead and believe this stuff and you keep it to yourself, you don't try to control other people, fine. But that's the problem. The whole concept of this religion controls people, and that's where we draw the line. No, you don't tell me what I believe. I can't control what I believe to begin with. You just can't.
Right, because we're subject to all kinds of conditioning that comes our way. Maybe we can't point to a lot of things that makes their life not great, but at the same time, we have to recognize that that's affecting their ability to make good decisions for the collective of all of us. And so if even half of our population thinks of the world in a way that is not real and can't be shown as true,
right?
How the heck are they going to make good decisions for the rest of us? You want to make America great again? Stop believing bullshit.
We got to share this world.
We do have to share this world. We don't have a choice. There's 8 fucking billion of us just plastered to this rock by gravity, and we don't have anything we can do about that. Even if the, billionaires think they can shoot themselves into space. Like, sorry, whatever. We're stuck on this rock.
Is that what it's really gotten to? Yes.
Yep.
We need some hobbies. Stop studying the Bible and get the fuck out there.
Well, yeah, go figure out how to fix shit or do yard work or do something.
Plant a fucking tree. Talk to your children. Listen to what they have to say. Don't sit there and study the Bible 100 times. Oh, is the Trinity real or is it not? Is it actually 3 persons?
What the fuck does that have to do with the price of bread? And that, to me, is more what we need to be worrying about. Who's got bread that they can put in their mouth and who doesn't? And how do we change that?
Oh, you just pray for it, Pats. That's the solution.
Oh, okay. I'm going to get mad if we go down that road. Fuck.
Weird.
Hashtag fiery bitches.
Robinson claimed that Armstrong never kept friends very long, and I'm actually not surprised. He claims he was friends with King Leopold III of Belgium, whom Stanley Rader called the ex-King Leopold. I don't know what happened between the two of them, but they ended up not being friends for long. Found out something new in 1969 that I didn't know had occurred. Dennis Rohan, he was a follower of Armstrong from, I want to say, Australia. He apparently committed arson against the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I don't know if I said that right, my bad. But it was located at the site of the old Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And what happened was he apparently conducted this arson in response to Armstrong's prophecy that the Jews had to quickly build their temple and stay aligned with what Armstrong's prophetic timetable was.
It's not happening fast enough. I'm just going to make his prophecy happen.
Well,
This is why we need to have good decision-making skills. Holy moly.
people were saying it was in response to Armstrong's teachings and his prophecies, and he went down there and he burned this site. That was August 21st, 1969, if anyone wants to look it up.
So not technically related to the 80s, but
Not technically related, but again, we're still covering David Robinson's book. And so
okay.
since he wrote it in 1980, we are going to be going back a little bit in the timeline to the 60s and 70s, since he talks about it a little more in depth. Another thing he talked about was the DNR program, which is divorce and remarriage program, where there would be like singles would be grouped into these sections where it was like eligible and ineligible. And this was in terms of whether they could remarry or not, whether they had gotten divorced. Like the church had to decide for them whether they could remarry. And this program would take sometimes years, and people would be sitting on it and be like, look, I've fallen in love, I want to remarry. And the church wouldn't give the okay for whatever reason. I don't know what their criteria was, but I'd be curious to look more into this DNR program. And I did find out that it did change. Armstrong changed his viewpoints on the DNR program come 1974, because that was conveniently right before he married Ramona, the 38-year-old secretary. So how convenient.
It was really lucky for him that God like gave him the word that that was going to change right then.
Yeah.
Oh, right when he had his sweet little young wife come along. Excellent for him.
Well, that was clearly his consolation prize that he divorced a few years later. Sorry. All right. Another interesting little tidbit. The spring of 1970 produced what Armstrong announced as a major financial crisis, one that had to be faced by using extreme means. What exactly does that entail? Let's take a look. Stanley Rader apparently told members of the church to rush to their banks, withdraw their funds, and send them to him immediately. If they did not have the funds in cash, then they should borrow what money they could and send it to him immediately without delay.
What
Thousands
the fuck?
of people responded, Patti. Thousands, and I am not surprised. And some still have not recovered from their generosity on this occasion.
Well, yeah.
Millions came in, Pats. So Armstrong still had both of his private jets at this point, and during this time is when Armstrong, I think, made his dumb sheep comment, where he called all of his members dumb sheep. I believe it. He said he had no respect for people that he could so easily manipulate, and that sounds exactly like something he would have said. So our parents among the people that were dumb sheep that could be easily manipulated. All of that money they could have used for retirement or for our education that we ourselves had to pay for and take care of.
Right.
It went to this guy. This guy.
Cool. Do I get to own one of the koi fish that lives on that campus now?
How about the parrot? You could take the parrot.
Oh God, it's probably still alive.
So next little tidbit, the church taught against doctors and medicine. We know this, and we know that it never changed. In 1970, one of the other evangelists, Roderick Meredith, that we will talk about more in detail later, he was superintendent of all the U.S. ministers. He developed, what is it, like a detached retina? He had a problem with one of his eyes, and I think it was detached retina. His doctor determined that an operation would actually save the eye. So Armstrong felt that in order for him to be able to serve God properly as one of his evangelists, he would need both his eyes. I guess divine intervention didn't come into play here. He said God would not want him handicapped with just one eye, and Rod was one of his principal tools, and it would only be repair surgery. Some sort of loophole. There were other members of the church that had a problem with this. Of course, they needed medical attention. They needed medicine. There was one minister from San Francisco by the name of Sid Cloud. He actually had that same problem, and he lost his eye because he was forbidden to go to a doctor about it. Which is really weird because our parents always took us to the doctor. I remember even not wanting to get either a shot or blood draw, and I was like screaming little child.
What the heck does that mean? Because we went to the doctor all the time, let
Mm-hmm, sure
alone the
did.
fact that our mom had a cesarean 4 times. Were they prohibiting that? Like, probably not. So it was like they said that almost like lip service, right? Like, oh, no medicine, no surgery, except if you need it. And then we'll just be like, okay, whatever.
Some people might know better than us. Armstrong went back and forth on so many different topics. It was hard to keep track of what the rules were.
I mean, that's the manipulation of it all. If you throw out every viewpoint and every aspect of a thing, and then you just feel like telling people whichever one you want when you want to control them, you can do that. And then you've got all the different options somewhere in your literature that you can point to direct them
Right.
where you want them anyway. Not a consistent message, really, at all.
All right, let me see if I can say this name right. Franz Josef Strauss.
Sounds
Does that
good.
sound correct?
Sure.
Okay. So he was chairman of the Christian Social Union of Bavaria in Germany. He had went to Pasadena, California in 1970 for some sort of speaking tour. And the Worldwide Church of God had been in touch with him and pronounced him as a prime candidate for the office of the Beast of Revelation. I don't know if he actually told him that, but that's basically like end time world dictator. I'm assuming he would not have taken that as a good thing. But Armstrong also taught that the Catholic Church was like Satan's prime instrument. The Pope was his chief disciple.
They were very
Quite nice.
anti-Catholic. I do remember that. I think it was even a big deal when JFK got elected because he was Catholic.
Another fun little nugget, Stanley Rader was actually Jewish. People in the church had a problem with it until he was baptized. They baptized him in like a bathtub or some shit at a hotel, I think in Japan. But he couldn't really be a part of the church until he was baptized and gave up being a Jew. However that works. I don't know.
I mean, it's just so funny. Like, oh, we can't handle that guy unless he dunks himself in a bathtub of water.
So next section in the book was about a little bit more about money and retirement funds. So Social Security was never paid to church employees, which I'm not surprised by that. They were told they wouldn't ever benefit from it since the government would fall before such a benefit could ever mean anything to them. It was far better to send that money into the church where it could be put to better use. Armstrong also didn't believe in paying overtime, of course, and taught against retirement and even taking vacations they didn't do.
You have to spend all your money on going to the feast. If you had extra money for vacations, I'm pretty sure you should have been giving that to the church.
Well, that was the vacation. Yeah, you saved up so that you could pay an additional tithe for the Feast of Tabernacles. Yes. He also sent out pamphlets requesting that people put their properties in a will to the church. This was not helpful for like all those widows out there who had homes that they knew they were going to die soon and they donated it to the church. That drives me crazy.
Probably much to the chagrin of their children who were expecting some sort of inheritance at their end of life. Yikes.
Yeah. There were some members of his own family, apparently, that also said he was like a close student of Mein Kampf. Yeah, that's Hitler's book. Like, I'm not surprised that Armstrong would have read it and gotten some sort of control tactics from this book.
I mean, it's kind of not surprising. Seems like something that might be using tactics of fear, either othering other people or elevating oneself as the superiorness. I mean, the racism is like just barely under the surface.
Yeah, speaking of his lifestyle, when Armstrong traveled, he apparently always needed his Dom Perignon, which is a very expensive champagne, the proper wines, grapes, other goodies, and he also liked the company of pretty young women to feed him, to keep him entertained. This was in both his private jets and in hotels. I don't know what I don't want to know what that entertainment entailed.
It's just so you.
He apparently liked to play this card game Hearts and always insisted on winning. Winning! We can't help but win! So much winning! David Robinson said he loved to win better than anyone I knew, and apparently loved to see his name in print and his own picture. Like he kind of got off on these things. Yeah.
Full on narcissistic qualities.
I mean, Armstrong had apparently also fallen into like the habit of delivering the same sermon. This was later on in years. You know, he didn't care about reading the Bible or giving sermons at this point. He's enjoying his life. He's enjoying all that money. So he would give these sermons that had just slight modification to them every time he spoke, year after year. Most of the people apparently considered it disloyal, almost blasphemy, if they were to notice his habits of this. And it was considered proper to remark how wonderful his sermon was. Yeah.
Ew.
He liked the accolades. And you know what? This reminds me of another memory when I was young. I want to say we were teenagers, but we were singing in a choir, both you and me, Pats. I want to say this was in Wisconsin. It was a horrible song. We sounded terrible up there. We had maybe a day to prepare. And it was that song, Our God is an awesome God, he reigns. No? Okay.
It's
Anyway.
okay. I'm just triggered. I'm just triggered. It's fine.
Triggered. It sounded terrible. And our father, you know, he was sort of a no bullshit person. He let us know, hey, it sucked. It sounded absolutely terrible. And there was this one really just cringy, douchey guy in the suit coming over here, just raving about how amazing we sounded, almost to the point where he wanted to join our church. He wanted to transfer here because the choir was so good. I was like, I know you're lying. Oh, why would you do that? It's like the same sort of dichotomy.
Isn't that very like North Korea? Oh, dear leader, you're so amazing. You can't have
Blessed are
any.
you who does not take a shit.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, no being dissonant with the prevailing ways of speaking in the church.
You never spoke out against anything. In fact, there was a different office for the pastoral administration, which apparently was really suspect. And then you had one for the Feast of Tabernacles, two different entities. This office had systematically been reduced as more of like a control point, as a power base. And this office was the one that was occupied by men who did not understand the game. Indeed, they did not know it was a game. I am convinced only two men knew that. I believe they are Herbert Armstrong and Stanley Rader. They knew and they played the game. They made the rules themselves. Others played by their rules. And more than that, the rules kept changing. Ted came back after being disfellowshipped. I believe this was like his 4-month suspension where he went to Colorado, probably just enjoying himself in a cabin going hunting. He was quickly made the chief executive officer of the whole organization. Welcome back, son dear. At the insistence of Ted's wife, Armstrong also got Ted a new jet to replace the old one, which had become contaminated through his adulterous activities. I know he was sleeping with a lot of the college girls in that, including the stewardess at the time.
Wait. So you're saying like hopefully no one ever took a UV light onto the jets?
That's so disgusting. Drink to that one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, by this point, Ted was apparently officially named his father's successor. That pissed off a lot of ministers because they had wives that had apparently fucked Ted. Ted admitted to sleeping with over 200 women. I'm sure he doesn't even know how many.
Ugh.
But Ted managed to convince the church that he never cheated, at least at one point. I remember reading about this meeting with all of the ministers and evangelists. It was like 7.5 hours where they discussed Ted and his moral failings, Stanley Rader apparently told him exactly what to say. Not only this, but Ted wanted to be an actor and he was good at charming people. And
I mean, at that point, people are just going to be like, okay, fine, you didn't, whatever. Let me out of this room.
Yep, I'm sure.
Ugh.
Somehow the stories were even written about him in like Penthouse, National Enquirer, LA Times. Armstrong began to express during this time that he very much needed a woman, he was feeling lonely, and he wanted to marry again. He was apparently talking with all the other men in his church, the elders, saying, well, how young can I go? Okay, here's what he apparently said. This was before he met his wife, Ramona Martin. He stated that he needed a much younger woman. I just can't think of getting into bed with an older woman. I can't see myself in bed with a wrinkled body.
Are you looking at your own, dude? Do you think she wants to get in bed with yours? Like, not even a thought for that. Ew. Like, come on, a couple of wrinkly people can handle each other, but gee.
He apparently had some romance with this woman named Amy, I believe, church employee who was 25 at the time. I don't know how old he was at the time, but that did come up in his court proceedings when he was divorcing, and then it got quickly squashed. Something happened there. He said he had actually been in love with this woman. He also apparently brought over some young Filipino lady. You know, he used to travel extensively throughout Southeast Asia, so he brought a little something home. But we never really hear anything else about this woman. This is the only place I've seen this information.
That gives a different flavor to his world travels, doesn't it? Okay.
All right. Are you ready for something really disgusting, Pats?
No, it's still the word. Okay, go ahead.
There is something out there known as the Little Black Book. Some call it the Flog Log. Do you see where I'm going with it?
Okay, I thought the Little Black Book was like where you keep numbers of your old girlfriends.
It's Armstrong's jerk-off sessions that he logged. Armstrong just stopped giving a shit. You know, once you're at that point in your life, if you're that age, you and I are already to that point where we don't give a shit anymore. He definitely didn't. And I think he just wanted someone to talk to. And he started talking about, his jerk-off sessions. In this case, the author of this book, David Robinson, said he was in direct contact with Armstrong. It was just the two of them during this conversation. You can imagine how awkward that would have been. But Armstrong apparently said that his first wife, Loma, whom he was married to almost for 50 years, was a terrible bed partner and never even took her top off. So he often resorted to masturbating. So he's kind of blaming her. I'm like, yeah, I know I forbid my church from jerking off, masturbating, but I had to because she was such a terrible bed partner. I'm like, okay. Can you imagine him sitting there? To be like, okay, well, this came out okay. What about this time? Oh, what does he write? I rubbed one out at 10:02. It lasted about 30 seconds.
Well, that's what I want to know. Is it just the dates or are we talking like details? Because no thanks.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being the person that found that in his personal effects after he died?
David actually flew to Armstrong's home in Tucson, where Armstrong had a list laying out these accusations, and it kind of sounded like catty chicks in high school. Like, did you say this about me? Did you say that about me? Like, what did you do? Did you screw my boyfriend? It kind of was reminiscent of that. So here's a few of the things that he brought to his attention. And they were all like hearsay. Like, you know, people are talking within the organization, and David Robinson was one that, you know, he's trying to put some feelers out. Like, who can I trust? Who can I talk to about these things that Armstrong is telling me? And one time he even answered the door naked. Apparently that was a thing that Winston Churchill even did, which is really strange. Just didn't think anything of it. He just answered the door naked. But whatever.
That seems like a I'm so powerful that you can't say anything about the fact that I did this right now.
So some of the accusations were that David apparently said Armstrong had an illegitimate child, that he cheated on his wife and fornicated, that he was senile, that Stanley Rader was gay. That's a new one. And that apparently Armstrong had naked pictures of himself having sex with young boys.
Wait, so this is what Armstrong is saying. David, I've heard that you have said all of these things about me.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Needless to say, I don't think David Robinson stayed in the organization much longer after that. Pretty sure he was excommunicated. But one final point in his book, he does cover in some detail about Armstrong supposedly molesting his daughter Dorothy, his youngest daughter, in like the 30s and 40s. Another book was published that year. This one is actually by Stanley Rader, and it's called Against the Gates of Hell. This one is more like storytelling. So he talks about Armstrong's background, which is similar to what he wrote in the autobiography, beginnings of the church, how Stanley Rader got involved, how he feels he was unfairly portrayed in that 60 Minutes interview where he stormed out. We saw it, we know.
Exactly.
And then he also ends the book with a letter from religious organizations and churches that had supported them during the whole state of California versus Worldwide Church of God, which did get dismissed, I think, that year as well, or the next. Yeah, it was that year. Because
religious freedom. We need our
religious
tax-free
freedom.
money.
But then the next year, Stanley Rader actually resigned as general counsel and treasurer. He stayed on, I think, for a while as like a personal secretary, but maybe he either retired or he got excommunicated like everyone else. Who knows? But I do know that he received a hefty $250,000 bonus after taxes, as well as a substantial pension. Another book came out in 1981 that I have not read, but it's called The Truth Shall Set You Free by John Tuitt. He's the guy that more or less initiated the lawsuit that ultimately led to the state of California looking into the finances of Worldwide Church of God. Late in 1981, a man named Jack Kessler, he sent a letter to the board of directors and council of elders at WCG. Why does that sound so cringy to me? Council of elders. Like, I just envision all these crusty white dudes sitting around like a conference table with no emotions.
Thinking they are masters of the universe.
Yes. Yes, that's the vibe I get. Anyone can go and look on this letter. I found it at exitsupportnetwork.com. And then something happened the next year. I was born. Yay.
Yay, I got a sister that year.
Yes.
Welcome, Earthside Nancy.
July 1st, 1982, there was a meeting between Armstrong and the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and Prince Charles.
Holy shit.
Not really an audience, but he got to shake his hand. So here's what happened. Armstrong is a first-class opportunist. The Royal Opera House in London was badly in need of funds for restoration, and this was one of the favorite causes of Prince Charles. Armstrong knew this, and he donated over $100,000 to this cause. And he thought, well, since he donated all that money, he would request an audience with Margaret Thatcher. He apparently had bragged that he already met with 3 other female PMs, and now he wanted to make it 4.
Just another notch on his prime minister bedpost, or what?
I guess, yeah. So he actually did get invited. He spent maybe a couple minutes with her, gave her Steuben crystal, the whole works. He had already been on radar within the royal family because he once said that he was going to co-host like some London film festival with the Queen, which wasn't true. I don't know why he thought he could lie about something like that, but yeah, the Queen had never heard of him or his organization. He also once told his followers that Prince Charles was the wicked prince who would cause the principal destruction of Britain. Nice. So there were actually former WCG members that sent letters to England warning the royal family about Armstrong. But I'm sure they were like, well, he's donating all this money to us and he might give us more, so we'll just humor him. We have people on staff.
Okay, so it says he shook Charles's hand at a benefit and likely didn't know who he was. Oh, because Charles likely was just like, okay, random dude, I'll shake hands. No idea.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there was an article that said kinky churchman fools Charles and his check bought a meeting with Maggie. The article also mentions that Armstrong's private jet had been named the Flying Whorehouse, eek, and that he had sex therapy sessions at the Otopeni Clinic in Bucharest, Romania, and then he used his jet to fly to London to buy a really particular sex toy. I mean, life is exciting when you've got a private jet to take you anywhere you want to go.
All right. So the next year in 1983, we have the Feast of Tabernacles, their 50th anniversary of the Eugene Church. So remember, Armstrong had his early roots in Eugene, Oregon. So he did end up giving a sermon there to some of like the original members of the church. And the next year, he divorces Ramona Martin. After, that was about 7 years, but I think they were separated since about 1981 or so. But followers of Armstrongism still won't even mention his divorce. It never comes up in any of the literature or anything. That's just something that they want to sweep under the table. And there were apparently many members that weren't even aware that he had a divorce. So he died only 2 years after his divorce. Imagine that.
I would say that's true because I do not remember anything about a wife of Armstrong's at all.
He accused Ramona of stealing church property. She wanted their Tucson ranch and like a large settlement out of the divorce. And then they came to an agreement. She would be hush-hush about the alleged molestation, and he gave her more money and property. It reportedly cost $5 million in legal fees.
Oh, some of that was our parents' money.
Yeah. And the following year, he went on his little 1985 European trip. I don't know all the places he went, visiting some of his friends in high places, like in Athens, met with the King of Spain, and so on. Another book comes out in 1985. This one is Armstrong's final book, and that is Mystery of the Ages. And let me tell you, Pats, I had to read that book pretty quickly, and I must say it was even more racist than his United States and Britain in Prophecy. And I will give you some quotes here of that book. The subtitle reads, "Did you ever ask yourself, who am I? What am I? Why am I? You are a mystery. The world about you is a mystery. Now you can understand."
Life is not that complicated. You get up, you go to work, you eat 3 meals, you take 1 good shit, and you go back to bed. What's the fucking mystery?
So he discusses the complexity of reading the Bible. Gee, I didn't know it was complex. Never would have guessed. And he explains how he managed to do it. He talks about his research of Darwinism. He says people around the world are just willfully ignorant of God, particularly in India. Sorry, they worship different gods, Herbie, not yours. He spouts some Bible verses. He rejects the Trinity yet again, which we know he was not a Trinitarian. He reiterates that quite often. He said that angels have guided him along in his journey of life. In one instance, he drove towards some person that he was supposed to pray for, someone who was like disabled. It's like Jesus take the wheel type of shit, right? And like, oh, I know God led me to this house because I felt the car move over there. He talks about sins and demons, how humans rejected eternal life. He said Jesus built these 3 colleges that have won awards as the most beautiful and best landscaped. That was all Jesus that did that, not all the members that donated money to pay for it.
Wait.
And he claims
the landscaping was the thing that was like critical to Jesus?
Well, he mentions the beautiful. He has to point out that they won awards, Patti. I mean, elevate himself yet again. He does this. He also claims that mankind is supposed to be here taking care of this earth. I've never heard him say anything like that, because he says Satan is the one that's ruining it. Like all the beautiful stuff, like his beautiful Ambassador College campuses are all God's doing, while Satan is doing things like all the third world countries or developing countries and starvation and all that. It's all Satan's fault.
So what that makes me think of
Mm-hmm.
is he's literally participating in the extraction process that left people in third world countries or developing countries trying to develop because their resources were violently stolen from them. So he participates in the stealing of resources and property from people in lower income countries, or however you want to say that, so that he can build his paradise in Southern California and then claim that Satan did one and God did the other, when he in fact did them all.
Let me read you some completely racist passages from this book. There was rampant and universal interracial marriage, so exceedingly universal that Noah only was unblemished or perfect in his generations, his ancestry. He was one of the original white strain.
Oh,
yeah, you read that right. It is amply evident that by the time of Noah, there were at least the 3 primary or major racial strains on Earth: the white, the yellow, and the black.
Wait,
Although
strains.
Strains, like a primary colors. Although interracial marriage produced many racial mixtures, God does not reveal in the Bible the precise origin of the different races. It is evident that Adam and Eve were created white. Is it?
What?
Is it? This is his last book, Pat. He can't use the excuse of like, oh, he didn't know better in the 30s or something. This was written in the 80s.
Wow. I mean, I remember being told at the very least that Eve was capable of giving birth to all races. I don't ever remember hearing like a full declaration that Adam and Eve were white, except every picture showed it that way.
And of Jesus.
Yeah. So silly.
God's chosen nation, Israel, was white. Jesus was white. Okay. But it is a fair conjecture. He never explains how he knows that as a fact, but it is a fair conjecture that in Mother Eve were created ovaries containing the yellow and black genes as well as white, so that some of the children of Adam and Eve, there it is, gave rise to black, yellow, as well as white. The one man God chose to preserve the human race alive after the flood was perfect in his generations. All his ancestry back to Adam was of the one strain. And undoubtedly, that happened to be white. How convenient for him.
Wait, this was written in the 80s?
Sure was.
Yeah. This seems like senility to me. Because if he didn't write this way for all that time, like, really? He's going to just release his most maybe true thoughts right before he kicks the bucket, the silver ice bucket.
These were always his thoughts, the silver ice bucket for $8,000.
Armstrong didn't just kick the bucket. He kicked the $8,000 silver ice bucket.
But he does go on to say, not that white is in any sense superior. Of course not.
No, I've just detailed out how exactly it is. What?
How exactly it should have been, yeah. If you are a livestock breeder planning to enter your prize animals in a livestock show, perhaps at a state or county fair, you will be sure to enter only thoroughbred or pedigree stock. Woo! Mixing the breed alters the characteristics. God originally set the bounds of national borders.
Oh, what?
Intending for nations to be separated to prevent interracial marriage.
Oh, that's disgusting.
I'll keep reading. It gets better. Notice when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, speaking of land or geographical boundaries, when he separated, notice he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people. But people wanted to intermarry. Jesus. Until there would be only one race. Noah was of perfect lineage in his generations. His wife and 3 sons were of that same white strain. But Japheth apparently had married an Oriental woman and Ham a black. We know little more than stated above about civilized development prior to the flood. Mankind should have learned its lesson by the flood. God intended to prevent racial intermarriages. But man has always wanted to violate God's laws and intentions. Yeah, it wasn't like I loved my husband before I married him or anything. That had nothing to do with it. I just wanted to go against a God that I didn't believe in. That's exactly what I wanted to fucking do. They wanted to become one race or family through intermarriage of races. Did we, though? Did we?
I don't.
We just happen to love people from different races?
Or we were just responding to our biological hormone-driven urges.
Like he did on his private jet all the fucking time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
God had set the bounds of the races, providing for geographical segregation in peace and harmony, but without discrimination. You segregate people into different lands, of course there's going to be segregation. That's exactly what the fuck it is. And he said this about Israel. Here was a people of almost clear racial strain. Clear? Now it's clear. God started his chosen nation off, even though brought out of slavery, with all the natural advantages of a superior heredity.
He's got like an entirely fleshed out racial diatribe, and then halfway through inserts like, this is not about racial stuff.
Oh, no, not at all.
Don't pay attention to the thing you're clearly seeing.
He even denied that there were different races anyway. He said white is not even a thing. That was in one of his early books. I don't know what the fuck he's saying here, Pats, but anyway.
Not a race, it's a strain.
I'll read that to my husband later and let him know he's some kind of mutation. So that's Mystery of the Ages, folks. Enjoy reading that one.
So that would have been like driving probably things I heard most that stuck with me, right? Because I'm actually what is this, 1985? Yeah, so by age 5, probably I've been quite indoctrinated already, but by age 5, like I'm really engaging with the ideas presented.
But we grew up in Southern California. There were Latinos absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, they didn't preach that stuff where we were. I wonder if they were in the Midwest.
Oh, okay.
I think the church culture by necessity was different regionally, and California was like full of everybody from everywhere with like thoughts around saving water and environmentally conscious things. Like it was a whole different landscape for the worldwide church to exist where it did in California. Like he definitely still had his meat hooks more into the people elsewhere.
Yeah.
In like the way he had for 50 years at that point.
And I'm surprised he had the hooks the way he did, because wasn't it only a few years prior that Jonestown had occurred down in Guyana? What was that 78 or something? So you'd think people would be on high alert for cults at this point, but maybe people just didn't even realize that's what Worldwide Church of God was.
Well, yeah, I think that wasn't clear to people until more recently. It wasn't clear to me till I opened up the Wikipedia page about 5 years ago, and I was like, oh, okay, actually, that makes some sense.
Doomsday cults. That was an amazing term. I was like, that's exactly what it is. Wow.
Right. But because we didn't have Kool-Aid served like Jonestown did, I think people weren't looking at the specific control behaviors, because also American culture was just that controlling too, just in different different ways based on McCarthyism and all the shit that happened in the Vietnam War and all of that. Yeah, people were conditioned for how to behave. In fact, I've heard it said that the people of the United States, their behavior, like anthropologically, is indicative of how people in a conquered province will behave.
Yeah, just ultimate defeat. Wow. That's really something, Beth. Something.
Disempowered.
All right. After that fun little nugget, September 1st, 1985 is Herbert W. Armstrong's final sermon. He gives it in Pasadena at the 1985 Feast of Trumpets. He was actually scheduled to travel to his summer camp in Scotland. I did not know about this place, but okay, he had a summer camp in Scotland. But then he ended up flying directly home because he was having some health issues. Obviously, you know, he's going to die soon. People know that. He's getting constant blood tests. I mean, he did have his own like personal doctor, physician that lived with him. And people knew about it and people were angry about it because he was getting medical care when everyone else couldn't. The following year, he did get his autobiography published, and that was the volume 1. So I've read volume 1. Volume 2 comes out in 1987. In the first volume, he really just talks about what it was like for him growing up in the 1800s, kind of seeing the turn of the century, his early jobs in advertising, his marriage, how he started Radio Church of God, great men that he wanted to emulate, his reactions to things like the Great Depression and the 2 World Wars. Again, I haven't read volume 2, but volume 1, actually the first half of the book I did find pretty interesting because you're seeing the world kind of, you know, through this young man's eyes of things like, oh, his reaction to the first automobile that went out on the road and what it was like to see a donkey pulling automobiles before they had, you know, engines.
He figured out what the game was all the way along, and by the 80s, he was on team ostentatious wealth. But yeah,
it would have turned out a lot differently had he been writing it as a young man, navigating this world more like a journal. But no, he wrote it from the standpoint of like this older man who already amassed all this wealth and power. Joseph W. Tkach Sr., he was actually appointed pastor general of the organization. He was really kind of not well known in the organization. He kind of started from the bottom and worked his way up, but Armstrong must have just really trusted him. He had so many people trying to pine after his wealth that maybe he just felt Tkach would not be that way. Now, he plays a pivotal role in the church as far as, you know, doctrinal changes and the church splitting apart come the 90s, which we'll talk about in the next session. We're still in the 80s, but he is made pastor general, and at least for a few years, he maintains the same doctrinal teachings that Armstrong had. All right.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't right away. That's right.
And only a few days later in 1986, this is January 16th, Herbert W. Armstrong dies.
Good riddance to bad rubbish. Let's stop recycling that shit, huh? Let's just incinerate it.
In 1988, one of the former evangelists named Charles Hunting, you recognize that name? He's the one that received that Bob Geringer letter that I had explained back in the 70s, where he was made aware of a lot of the corruption in the church. And so he started doing research on his own. Well, in 1988, he spoke on the Clyde Thomas show on WKIS. I think that is in Orlando, Florida. So I will just read you a few of the takeaways from that exchange, because a few people had actually called in and were able to ask him questions as well. So being just yet another excommunicated evangelist that had information to share.
Excellent.
He discusses how his mother actually died of cancer because the Worldwide Church of God taught against doctors in medicine. I'm sure he was really pissed about that. Though apparently Gardner Ted had given him permission to take her to the hospital, but then by then it was too late. He lost his mother. He said that Ted was pretty lax in a lot of ways. He even got fined for like shooting a bear up in Alaska during this hunting trip that had occurred on the Sabbath. Ooh, he did something scandalous during the Sabbath. So that made headlines.
Wasn't that one an illegal one too, where he was deciding he was just going to shoot from his plane?
Yes, he had his pilot license, and I think he was shooting down from his plane. But then he got caught, I think, because he had to pay like a $500 fine, and the church was mad at him, not for that, but for doing something on the Sabbath. It was like at sundown.
Not the fact that it was illegal poaching. Cool.
One of the callers had stated that a member during the church once stood up and asked Armstrong if he could explain what he meant when he said there were only 2 approved sex positions. This is something we covered in our Unpack It series already about how Armstrong stated there were only 2 sex positions in the book, The Missing Dimension in Sex. And purportedly, Armstrong looked right at him, pointed, and said, "You're out of the church."
That's so stupid. It's like Austin Powers with what's Dr. Evil, how he's like got all of his people around the table and he just pushes a button to send them down to the piranhas or something.
Another caller had discussed how Armstrong was said to have plagiarized materials from other churches like the Watchtower, which is Jehovah's Witness literature, as well as literature from the Seventh-day Adventists. We know this. He didn't even come up with the name The World Tomorrow. That came from like the World's Fair during that time.
So then we got David C. Pack 2 layers out from that, doing The World to Come. It's just one big like circle jerk of ideas to put out there. Just chew it up, spit it out again, see if it still works.
I have a little fun fact in here. So Charles Hunting claimed that the Roman Emperor Constantine boiled his wife in her bathtub. Is that true?
I have no idea.
It's kind of like where Armstrong accused Socrates of being a sex pervert. Just throwing random facts out there and not knowing if they're actually true. This guy, Charles Hunting, he went on to co-author a book titled The Doctrine of the Trinity, Christianity's Self-Inflicted Wound. And that was published not until 1998, but he was in the middle of writing that book when he had this interview. He still believed that the Trinity was not a thing and that Emperor Constantine came up with the idea. This is about the followers that are still bound. They will not read anything that is adverse, and they will not listen. We train them to shut their minds off. That's very true. We train them to think in the direction that we told them to think.
Oh my freaking gosh. I'm sorry.
When they began to deviate from that thinking, we warned them that they were tampering with a world that could be extremely dangerous to them, that would bring them out of the one and only true church.
The way I spell that is F-E-A-R, fear.
If you were a member of the church in good standing and you began to question and to ask for an accounting of the funds, you were told that it was not your responsibility. You give your money to God, and what God does with that money or what his appointed representatives do with that money is none of your business from there on. You only have one responsibility: to pay and to pray. So that the idea of asking for any accounting would be disrespecting the very authority that you were supposed to be loyal to in the church. That would probably lead to your being excluded and separated from the society and the group. If you persisted in that questioning, you would obviously be determined to have a bad attitude, asking where the money was going, and asked to leave the church. You would probably be told that nobody in the church is to visit with you again.
That's the whole game. That's the end point of fear. What's the fear? Well, if it's not existential crisis like hell, it's all your friends, all the people you talk to on a regular basis, your support system. Poof, it's going to go away. How are you going to think of your life after that? See, you need me. You need to send me your money so you can stay safe.
1980s, that was a lot to take in. We were in our prime of the learning process during this point. I didn't even know what to think about it. I'm just surprised that the Worldwide Church of God made such a comeback in the 1980s. I mean, it really was doing well. It was like some of the 1970s and all of that drama was trickling into the 80s a little bit, but I feel like once Armstrong started back up again, being the face of the church instead of Ted, things changed.
Well, I think he remember we talked last time, it was like he figured out the new game because the old things he'd been saying since the 30s weren't catching people anymore because people were letting go of God and stuff like, in traditional church situations. So it seemed like he was realizing, oh, the new morality, not the kind he said, but like people's new morality in this country kind of valued the rest of the world and valued other cultures and valued helping those who didn't have enough, right? We grew up with all of the ads on TV of just $1 a day will support this child, right? And they'd show you the sad stories of children around the world. And so we had probably as Americans quite an appetite for feeling like we were doing good in those realms. And so then he was like, cool, guess what? That's what I'm doing. So when you send money to me, you're doing that too. And also, you're going to get the heavenly rewards. I mean, it was a good grift.
Well played, Herbie. Well played.
Yeah, and also good riddance, dude.
So I know Armstrong is dead by this point, but we are going to continue into the 1990s with our last episode, probably will be the next one. And I will be talking a little bit about the splinter churches that came out of Armstrongism once the doctrinal changes came about and people didn't like it anymore.
This series is the life and influence of, and so his influence, unfortunately, hasn't really stopped all the way.
Right. It's just in different churches now, which they can't even agree either. So, yeah.
Well, no wonder. We've pointed out over and over how he says two different things that contradict. So each church just probably picked what they wanted and created their own contradictions to keep their people mentally controlled. Thanks for joining us for this very enlightening fourth episode of the Life and Influences of one Herbert W. Armstrong. We'll see you next time. Like and subscribe.
Yay.